Thank you to those of you who served and you took the time and you took resources to go on that particular outreach trip. We're in a unique season at Timberlake. We've been experiencing growth. Last week in between all of our services, we were right at the 4,000 people mark. We're experiencing momentum in our students and in our children. But I want to point this out. If you were here on Friday evening, for our night of worship, there is a growing heart of God that supersedes any type of numerical growth we could celebrate. There's this excitement among our teenagers, among our young adults, and really among the church. And I just want to say I'm so proud of this church, and I'm very privileged to be pastoring at this time in history. So I'm ready. Are you ready for the future? Are you ready for where we're headed? Come on, baby. When I was a kid, we did not have smartphones or streaming services to stay entertained like we have today, but we did have board games. And any game kind of fell under that category of board game, right? So Hungry Hippos was in that category. Chutes and Ladders was in that category. Connect Four was in that category. But probably my favorite game growing up, at least one of the most exciting, was Operation, baby. Yeah, let's go, right? Because if you played Operation as a child, you know how it works. There were little tiny plastic pieces inside these gaps here, and you had to try to get out that piece without touching metal to metal. Otherwise, that's exactly what you'd hear, right? Now, I know not all parts of the world had this game, but this was super exciting. And if you were able to do it, you just felt like you were on the fast track to becoming a surgeon. Right? You couldn't be trusted with a butter knife, but yes, you could be a surgeon. So you take out these plastic pieces, but you had to be careful, you had to be patient. And I gotta tell you that what we're gonna talk about today makes me feel like we're playing one big game of Operation. I feel like I gotta be a surgeon, I gotta just be very, very careful. Otherwise, right? We have some emotions and some sensitivity taking place. And the reason I say this is because we're continuing a series we started several weeks ago called Asking for a Friend. And it's a series in which we're wrestling with questions that most people have, but for some reason they don't vocalize them. They feel stupid, they feel like it's not that big of a deal, like maybe everybody else has the answer. But the question we're wrestling with today is a very triggering question. It's attached to a lot of different emotions. As a matter of fact, I'm not making this up. Earlier today, I just watched a handful of people throughout the service just kind of make their way to the exits, and it is what it is. So what question could it possibly be? What are we going to talk about? Here it is. Why do churches ask for money? Why do churches ask for money? Like, why does giving matter? If God owns everything, why does God need my money? Right? So as a pastor, the reason I say I feel like we're playing one big game of Operation is because of the emotions attached. And quite honestly, I feel sensitive because I know we stand up here week after week saying, bring your friends. We want to be an engaging place, inviting place, and you bring your friend. You're like, really? Really, Dave? That's what you're going to do to me? Right? You're going to take on this topic. Others of you, you've experienced the abuse. You've seen some of the misuse of finances in a church that you are a part of. And so it's kind of jaded you. And so we're kind of all over the map. But what I want to point out, and I think is very important to point out, is those feelings, those emotions are legit, but it's not just faith and finances that create tension. It's just money in general has emotions attached, right? Stirs them up, right? When you have a friend that starts a GoFundMe page and then they send you a link asking for money, emotions are stirred. Now, it might be something you're excited about, it might be something that you're dreading, but regardless, emotions are stirred. When someone shows up to your house unannounced trying to sell you windows, or shingles or solar panels, there's emotions that are stirred. When you're interviewing for a job and you start to negotiate salary, there's emotions involved. When parents die and you discover there's no inheritance, there's emotions involved. When you discover there is an inheritance, however it's divided, there's emotions involved. And that's because money impacts every part of our life. Our sense of security is impacted by finances. This week, my heart broke when I read the article of Microsoft doing a pretty big layoff, right? Thousands of employees affected. Our identity and what we think about ourselves, that's attached to money. Of course, there's going to be emotions in there. Our freedom, our ability to choose, our ability to have options in front of us, the opportunities in front of us, that's impacted by money. Our dreams and goals are impacted by money. We can't survive without money. Water and food and shelter, all of that is attached to money. And that's why this is such an emotional topic. And just think of some of the emotions attached to money, right? Guilt is attached to money. I should be saving more. I should be giving more. I should be more prepared for retirement. I should have made that purchase. There's a lot of guilt. Fear. What if? What if the economy changes? What if I'm not as prepared for retirement as I imagined I would be? What if I get laid off? There's a lot of fear. There's shame attached to money, especially living on the east side. When you see where everybody else is at, you just feel like, how did that happen? They're so far ahead, I'm so far behind. There's shame. We start to feel certain things about ourselves. There's suspicion involved. Right? None of us want to be ripped off or taken advantage of, yet we hear stories of financial abuse or misused funds. And we don't know what text to trust, right? We get a text and it's like, you have a package that you missed, and so we need to reschedule delivery with UPS or with FedEx. Click here. And you're like, should I click there, right? Or you have an unpaid toll. If you click here, you can avoid a fine. And you're like, oh gosh, do I do this? I was hanging out with some staff this week, and I got a phone call, and I typically don't take a call from a number I don't recognize, but it was someone from the sheriff's department in King County informing me that I had missed basically for jury duty selection. And I said, I think you got the wrong number. They said, no, we sent you a letter. I said, what address did you send to? They read my address right off, and I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Send me an email, resend the letter, or better yet, I'm gonna hang up, you call back and leave it on voicemail. And he got really stern with me, and it says, no, you need to step out of your meeting right now. We need to deal with this. And my emotions, this will give you a little insight of my personality. I said, no, you can call, boom. And then the staff's laughing, those I'm with, they're like, man, you're intense. And I said, he was just being rude. And then someone said, wait a minute, hold on. Why did he need you to stay on the phone? Why couldn't he do this? And then they looked up and said, hey, Dave, this is most likely a scam. And our suspicion, our skepticism is built because of the culture we live in and just the craziness we see. And of course, churches aren't exempt. If you've ever watched the show on HBO, Righteous Gemstones, I mean, it makes a mockery of churches our size, right? It just makes it look like through satire that every church is gonna misuse money or abuse power, and the leadership is greedy and dysfunctional. And so yeah, naturally, when we talk about money, it's going to feel like we're playing a game of Operation. And in reality, when we talk about finance, we talk about giving, everybody I know wants to give. It's true, but there's so many emotions, it's hard to know where to start. And because of the impact this topic has made on my life, I get super excited actually to share about it, but yet hesitant in how we share. That's why once or twice a year, I just say, hey, let's talk about this because this helps us in our spiritual journey. In fact, I would argue that giving accelerates our spiritual maturity. It's actually attached to our spiritual maturity. Whenever we give money away, whether we're giving it to a child, to someone in need, to a charity, to a church, whenever we give money away, what happens is our heart starts to move away from us into another direction. Jesus explained it this way. He says, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Now, it would make sense that where my desire is, that's where I put my treasure. So if I'm a Seahawks fan, I'm putting money into Seahawks tickets. If I like concerts, I'm gonna go to concerts. That's where I'm putting my money. Jesus says that's true, but it's also true that if you have no desire for something and you start to put money in that direction, your heart starts to follow. You get interested in it. So if you're not into cryptocurrency and you start to buy Bitcoin or Ethereum or XRP or Cardano, right? What happens is you start to pay attention to those things because your finances are moving in that direction. And this is so important for us to understand. Because if we want for the desires of our heart to not just be focused on ourselves, we have to think about giving to something other than ourselves. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but the most mature people on this planet are people who give. They're parents, they're teachers, they're volunteers, they're those who foster children. When we give, it builds our maturity. And it's true whether you're a follower of Jesus or not. You can have lots of money and be immature and self-centered because you hold on to it all. One of the most successful businessmen of the 1900s was Jean-Paul Getty, right? The founder of Getty Oil Company. In 1957, Fortune magazine called him the richest living American. In 1966, Guinness Book of World Records listed him the wealthiest private citizen in the entire world. He was worth $1 billion in 1966 dollars. But he was a miser. He had a reputation for just being stingy. Here's a picture of the Sutton Place mansion where he spent a significant amount of time when he was living in England for a while. If you were visiting him at his house and wanted to use a phone, he had phones all throughout the house, but they were locked down. There was one phone you could use. That was the pay phone he had installed. It's way worse than that, though. When his son Timmy had a cancerous brain tumor, he continually complained about the medical expenses. And he was constantly whining to his wife about how much they were paying. In fact, when his son ended up dying, he didn't even attend his son's funeral because he was too busy working. That's a reflection of his heart, right? And there's just so many stories attached to him. When his grandson was kidnapped, Jean-Paul Getty spent so much time negotiating the ransom that the kidnappers became impatient and they chopped off his grandson's ear. Well, he eventually pays the ransom, but then he charges it back to his grandson's dad at an interest rate of 4%. Right, and the event obviously traumatized his grandson, lifelong implications. All I want to say is this. Here's a brilliant man, Jean-Paul Getty, brilliant, but he lacks compassion, perspective, and maturity. He's a grown adult, but acting like a child. His reputation was he's emotionally distant and stingy and mean. The most mature people on this planet are people who give. They give time, they give energy, they give resources, they give money. They say, I'm just not going to be about myself. Now, generous people are human. They still wrestle with fear. They still wrestle with comparing themselves to other people. They still wrestle with guilt and shame, but yet they continue to be generous. In doing so, those things that grip their heart start to loosen up. And so giving plays a big role in our spiritual development. Now, do not misunderstand me. It is possible to be a follower of Jesus Christ and never give. It is possible to be a follower of Jesus and never be generous. Because our salvation is not based on what we give. At the same time, it's important to understand that it is not possible to be a mature follower of Jesus without being a generous person. Because the very essence of maturity says, I'm going to live for something other than myself. And when we become followers of Jesus, what happens is the Spirit of God goes to work on our heart, chiseling away at our character and our worldview and our values, shaping us to become more like Jesus. And God's Spirit will use scripture, God's Spirit will use teaching, God's Spirit will use individuals in our life so much to work on us so that we become more like Jesus. In fact, the Apostle Paul explains it this way in one of his letters. He says, and the Lord, who is a Spirit, makes us more and more like him as we are changed into his glorious image. Becoming like Jesus is a lifelong journey. God's Spirit's constantly stretching us and shaping us and convicting us so that we become more like Jesus in the way we think and act and speak and love. And one of the greatest expressions of love is giving. This is why children will spend 30 minutes, they'll spend an hour, sometimes a couple hours creating something, making something to give to one of their parents. It's their way of expressing love. It's the reason parents will give things to their kids. It's an expression of love. It's why at Christmas with families we exchange gifts and give gifts because it's an expression of love. And often giving is a joyful experience. It's something we want to do. Jesus emphasized this in one of his teachings. He said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. It's blessed to give. It's exciting. There's joy in it. But let's not overlook the fact that it's also fun to receive. Right? When you're on the receiving end of something, especially when it's a meaningful gift, there's something about it. Years ago, like back in 2000, my wife and I were really tight financially. We had very little saved. We were just getting by week to week. And one of our cars broke down. And so we had to start, we would just share a car. One of us would drop the other one off, and we were working through this. Well, someone saw what was happening, and they just said, hey, Dave, I've got a car. It's like 8 years old. It's not brand new, but it would be an honor to give it to you. And I thought, it would be an honor to receive it. Right, so I received this gift, and it just felt like I won the lottery. It was such a blessing. It lasted for so many years. So it's not just fun to give gifts. It's also fun to receive gifts, but Jesus said when you balance out the two, it's actually more blessed. It's actually more fun when you get to the point of giving. But that's so hard to embrace and understand because our culture constantly wants to create in us a vision for receiving. All the marketing that's done in this world is focused on getting us to consume and collect and upgrade. So it's natural to have a vision in this life of what I want to achieve and accomplish and accumulate. That's why we have vision boards, right? And vision boards are great. There's nothing wrong with them. But our vision in this life should be more than just receiving and accomplishing. Every follower of Jesus should have a vision for giving. Every follower of Jesus should have a vision of of saying, God, whatever I have, I wanna be a part of blessing other people. What giving does is it disrupts self-centeredness and reflects the heart of God to others. So back in the first century, there were Jewish believers in Jerusalem living in extreme poverty. And the Apostle Paul writes a letter to Jesus' followers living in Corinth, 800 miles away, and he says, hey, we got some believers over here struggling. I wanna challenge you to help them out. As a matter of fact, you're committed to do that, but you've kind of dropped the ball. Come on, we can do this. Here's what Paul writes to them. He says, since you excel in so many ways in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love from us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. Every time you and I give, we're stepping into a different level of spiritual maturity. And the reason I say that is because we're being set free. Every time we give, we're being set free from the fear and the greed and the cynicism and all the real, genuine emotions that are attached to money. Every follower of Jesus should have a vision for giving. In ancient Jewish culture, there was a practice called the tithe. Literally meant 10% or 1/10. And it was this practice of giving the first 10% of one's income back to God. And it actually wasn't a suggestion, it was a law that the Jewish people lived by. They lived by it because God made it clear to Moses. He says this, 1/10 of the produce of the land, whether grain from the fields or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord and must be set apart to him as holy. So the Israelites are told, you have to take 10% of your crops, 10% of your livestock, 10% of your income, and give it to the Lord as an offering to him. Clear expectation. But you and I do not live under the obligations of the Jewish law, which makes this topic so difficult. Because it means that we have to wrestle with the issue of giving. We have to pray about it. We have to reflect on it. We gotta think about it. It feels like it'd be a lot easier if God just said, give this percentage, give this amount. This is what you have to do. Then we don't have to think about it. But he doesn't do that. And so I have to work at creating a vision for giving. I have to wrestle with this issue. Now, personally, this has been pretty easy for me. I'll acknowledge that because I grew up in a home where my parents had a big vision for giving. Right? When I tell my dad that I'm concerned I'm gonna have nothing to inherit from him someday, his response every time is, that's my goal. That's my goal, right? He's lighthearted about because he wants to give to God's kingdom at such a big level. And so when I had my first job and I started making money, I didn't have to pray about it. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to create a vision for giving. My parents told me what my vision for giving was. They said, this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna give this much to God. And it was like, okay, but so that's been easy. Most people don't grow up like that. I get that. So how do you build a vision for giving in your life? If you wanna build a vision for giving, the first thing that you and I have to do is we have to recognize that I have something to give. It's easy to say, I don't have anything. I wish I did. If I won the lottery, if I came across a huge promote, man, that's when I'm gonna give. Listen, when it comes to giving, it is never about the size of the gift. It is about the posture of the heart. Everyone has something to give. Even if it's $1, which is 30 seconds of parking in downtown Seattle, right? It's something. When these believers living in Jerusalem were struggling with poverty, there was another group of people struggling with poverty. They lived in Macedonia. And the Apostle Paul writes about these Macedonian believers and how they decided they were gonna help the Jewish believers. Here's what he writes about them. He says, for I can testify. Now prior to this, he already talked about how they're living in poverty. He says, but I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. Do not minimize whatever it is you're able to give. And do not underestimate the impact of consistent, faithful giving. The next step to building a vision for giving is to understand that I am a steward and not an owner. Throughout the teachings of Jesus, throughout the stories Jesus told, throughout the parables that Jesus would tell, he made it clear over and over and over. We're not owners, we're just stewards, we're managers. God trusts us, he blessed us, and then we have to figure out prayerfully, like, Lord, how do I use this in a God-honoring way? And then Jesus, in one of his teachings on money, says this, if you're faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones as well. He said, there's a pattern. Don't wait till you win the lottery. He says, start now, because if you can be faithful in little, it's just a reflection of your heart that you'll also be faithful with a lot. You wanna build a vision for giving? There's a third thing that you need to do, and that is confront your willingness to give. When someone says, I just don't give, my challenge every single time, I'm never gonna be a high pressure guy, I'm never going to be this salesman. I think God's Spirit is powerful enough, doesn't need me. But my question every time is why? What do you think that is? Is it indifference? Is it fear? Is it cynicism? Is it anger over things you've seen? What is that? Don't allow the indifference. Don't allow the fear. Don't allow the cynicism. Don't allow it to keep you from becoming a generous person. Because if you and I are willing to confront our lack of desire to give, so to speak, and we say, I'm gonna confront this, I'm gonna figure out why this is, and now I'm gonna start to give. Let me tell you, we at that time begin to enter into what God is doing in this world. We get to be a part of it. And with the little time we have left, I wanna anchor here. And I just kind of want to unpack this because it's easy to forget this, that for most of the time that he was on earth, Jesus was a carpenter. That's how he made a living. But then around 30 years old, he moved away from carpentry and devoted himself full time to teaching and healing and caring for and ministering to people. How was he able to do that? Well, he was able to do that because there were people who helped fund his ministry. Here's what Luke, who was a doctor and researched the life of Jesus, told us about this, that among his supporters, that among them were Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's business manager, Susanna, and many others who were contributing from their own resources to support Jesus and his disciples. Jesus had people who made it possible for him to do ministry on earth. So many examples of this in the early church. The reason we have the book of Acts, the reason we have the book of Luke, is because there was a wealthy man named Theophilus who said to Dr. Luke, you travel, you research, you investigate the life of Jesus, and I want you to write documents about him. This is why at the start of Luke, in the start of the book of Acts in our Bible, Theophilus, his name is mentioned. The Apostle Paul, he had plenty of people who surrounded him and said, we want to fund what you're doing, we want to fund your ministry. And Paul was a tent maker. So Paul would earn some funds himself, but there were other people who came alongside him and said, man, we want to be a part of what you're doing. We want to partner with you in this. One of the ladies who partnered with him, her name was Phoebe. Paul writes about her in the book of Romans. He says, welcome her in the Lord in a way worthy of the saints and help her in whatever she may need from you. For she has been a patron of many and of myself as well. Now he uses this word patron. A patron is someone who uses their resources to advance and spread the message of God's love. And throughout history, God has consistently moved on the hearts of individuals to support missionaries and pastors and churches and Jesus-focused ministries. It's so fascinating to me, right? Because if Jesus wanted to, he could cause money to grow on trees. It's like, I'll take that and that and that, and then I'll use it to fund God's kingdom. If God wanted to, he could cause money to grow under rocks. That is not the way God works. God uses ordinary, regular people with different amounts of resources, and he moves on their heart for them to say, I want to be a part of what God's doing. It doesn't even make sense. It sounds foolish that someone would use their hard-earned money to fuel something that doesn't directly benefit them. But this is why we learn in one of Paul's writings that God uses the foolish to confound the wise. Last year, I read a book that rocked my world in a big way. It's called Gospel Patrons. The word gospel means good news, and so this book is about a handful of individuals throughout history who helped fund the good news of Jesus through their giving. They helped move God's kingdom forward. One of the individuals written about in this book is William Tyndale. If you have a Bible in the English language, it's because of the work that William Tyndale did. He had this passion to get the Bible in a language that common people could understand. Prior to this, it had been translated into Latin, so educated clergy understood it, but not the ordinary average person. And so he had this passion, and the church said no. It was actually illegal to do this because they just felt it was too dangerous for people like you and I to have a Bible in our own language. Like theologically, we could go in a bad direction. And so lots of people were scared by it, but there was a guy named Humphrey Monmouth who came alongside Tyndale and said, I believe in your vision. Matter of fact, I'm gonna give you a place to live. I'm gonna give you a place, I'm gonna pay for your food. I'm gonna resource you. And then he just elevates it, and as this Bible's being translated, he said, now I wanna make sure we have more than 3,000 Bibles printed. And so Humphrey Monmouth decides to just elevate his giving and funds this, what's happening in just an amazing way. And it gets his business partners to do the same. And he's risking his own life. Eventually, he is put into prison because, again, what they're doing is illegal. And thankfully, he after serving some time, he was let out. But Tyndale, when he was in prison, he ended up executed. But there was this passion for giving that Humphrey had that said, I want to be a part of what God's doing. There's another story documented in this book. It's a story from the 1700s. It's about Lady Huntingdon, wealthy woman in London. She's born into upper-class British society. She inherits her wealth through marriage. And after her husband dies, she meets a young preacher by the name of George Whitefield. George was in his early 30s, and he was just a fiery guy, and God's using him. And she says, George, I love how God's using you. I love that you're preaching in these open-air meetings. I love that you're helping the poor. I love that so many people are surrendering their lives to Jesus. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start hosting gatherings in my home. I'm going to invite the wealthy and the elite from London into my home, and I want you to preach to them. So that's what she did. She gathered the elite, and she said, George, you're up. Give us a message. And his very first message, true story, his very first message to this group of people was about how rich people have a very difficult time entering into God's kingdom. The guy did not have a lot of emotional intelligence, right? But he's open with them, and he says, I want you to break off your false dependence of money, and I want your faith to be revived. And God began to work among this elite group of people. And Lady Huntingdon went on to fund so much of Whitefield's ministry. Through their partnership, it's estimated that George Whitefield in his lifetime spoke to more than 10 million people. Later on, she realized, hey, we need churches to be built so believers can gather together. We need chapels. She personally funded 64 different chapels like this one in Brighton, England. She founded a college to train pastors. She gave sacrificially, investing deeply in church planting and evangelism and training. And her story is just another reminder of how God is at work. He's going to raise up people to fund what he's doing. This book also tells the story of John Thornton, a successful business merchant and banker in the 18th century, one of the wealthiest men of the 18th century. And when he learned of the work that John Newton was doing, John Newton was a former slave trader. He had surrendered his life to Jesus. He was a pastor. He's actually the guy who wrote Amazing Grace. What happened is John Thornton says, I want to fuel your ministry. He also became a key supporter of a guy by the name of William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was working in Parliament to end the slave trade in Britain. And so here's this guy, John Thornton, that most of us have never heard of. His generosity helped fuel one of the most important social justice movements in history. And I hesitate sharing these stories because I know they feel so distant, right? You're 1600s, 1800s. These are people who lived a long time ago. It's hard for us to relate to them. They lived in areas of the world that some of us may never even have visited. But what I want you to see is that when God is up to something in this world, he's going to move on the hearts of his followers to help fund it. When the great preacher Billy Graham was just getting started in ministry, and his ministry was gaining momentum, this is in the mid-1940s, he had someone come along and offer to pay for his travel. And he writes about this in his autobiography, Just As I Am. Here's what Billy Graham writes. He goes, there was a very generous businessman, Mr. Walter Block of Kenosha, Wisconsin, who gave me an air travel card to use. He gave it to the founder of the ministry I was serving with, and to me. And as long as I was with that ministry, I had that card and could charge the ticket to his account. Basically, it was an early version of the credit card. Now, I grew up in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I never met Mr. Walter Block because he passed away before I was born. But I met a few of his children. And they had the same heart of generosity as their father did. Walter Block's legacy is a legacy of giving. It's a legacy of generosity. Imagine that kind of generational impact where your children are showing a little bit of who you are and reflecting your character. And it's not by your anger, it's not by being impulsive like you were, it's because of your generosity. When I started a church in Kenosha 17 years ago, one of Walter Block's grandchildren decided to help fund us at an elevated level. And the entire time I was with that church, that grandchild and their spouse continually funded us over and over and over, making ministry possible that would not have been possible without it. And I tell you that because you need to hear this. Gospel patrons still exist. Timberlake Church is here because for the past 35 years, there have been men and women There have been young men and young women. There have been boys and girls who say, God, I don't have a lot. In some cases, they said, I have a lot. But they said, I want to give back and I want to help fuel what's happening. Regardless of how many or how few resources you have, I want you to know you have the opportunity, I have the opportunity to be part of what God is doing in this world. And being a patron doesn't mean we have to fund everything ourselves. It doesn't mean like a project's introduced, it's like, oh, I got to find a way to fund all of that. The truth is that throughout history, God has often used our collective generosity to move his kingdom forward. This is why we have children at this church who are gospel patrons. We have students at this church who they give when they have a small income from the job they have and they give back. They're gospel patrons. And when we give, if you're a follower of Jesus, you need to hear this. We give to the church first. And the reason I say that is because the local church is the hands, the feet, and the mouthpiece of Jesus in this world. And I tell people, if you're a part of a church that is not making a noticeable difference here, near, and far, you need to go find another church. You need to be a part of a church that is representing Jesus well on this planet. In every city, in every village, in every town around the world, God is constantly stirring the hearts of men and women, saying, hey, I'm up to something, but I need some people to fuel it. My prayer for you is that you will capture, you will develop a great vision for giving in your life. If you're a follower of Jesus, that you would fund the ministry and the mission work of a church, of a local church like this. If this is your church, it would happen here. Now, if you say, I'm not a follower of Jesus, I don't buy into that, I'm not a religious person. Listen, I hope you have a vision for giving. Just give to a nonprofit. Give to something that isn't Jesus focused, but that's making a difference in this world. Don't go through life holding on to everything. You want a vision for giving? You have to realize you do have something to give. You have to realize I'm a steward, not an owner. You have to realize that, hey, there's some reasons that maybe I've struggled with giving, so I have to confront my willingness to give. But after I've done those things, here's bottom line, what I just need to do. I just need to start giving. That's it. Just start somewhere, even if it's $1. We do not guilt people at Timberlake Church into giving. As a matter of fact, we're one of the very few churches that I'm personally aware of that does not pass an offering bucket in our services. I had a church consultant tell me not long ago, they said, hey, just so you know, if you are not passing a bucket in your services, you're leaving money on the table. I said, I'm okay with that. Because I just trust that God moves on our hearts. Maybe I'm naive. I do know this. When we stopped passing offering buckets a year and a half ago, our giving didn't go down, it actually went up. People said, I'm gonna still be faithful. I was at a conference years ago that said, hey, there's a psychology behind giving. If you use a larger giving envelope, it's psychological, people write bigger checks. I'm dead serious, I'm not making this up. And I leaned over to the person I was with and said, we are not going to do that. It's ridiculous, it's embarrassing. Listen, we do not give because we're under some obligation to an ancient Jewish law. The reason we ought to be excited about giving is because we live in one of the wealthiest nations in the history of the world, to whom much is given, much is required. We're so blessed. And if you say, oh, I don't feel like I'm blessed, try moving. Look how much junk you have around your house. We have so much stuff, right? But we're blessed to be a blessing. We're blessed with talents and opportunities and resources, not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of others. Now, again, I know some of you didn't grow up like I did. So if you say, Dave, I've never been a practice in my life, let me give you the most basic plan for giving that I give every time I talk about this topic. I encourage people, when you get paid, prioritize your giving. Meaning, I get paid, I'm gonna give something back to God. What does that look like? It's between you and God, just figure it out. But make it a discipline, make it a habit that I'm gonna be a priority giver. It's just gonna happen. After you've developed that habit, after you develop that pattern, take the next step and say, I'm gonna be a percentage giver. Percentage giving is saying, hey, I'm gonna choose a percentage and I'm gonna give that back to God. Now, again, we don't live under the Jewish law of you have to give 10%. Full disclosure, my wife and I, since we've been married, have given a minimum of 10% back to the work of Jesus through our entire marriage. Not because of this obligation, but we just feel this blessing. And again, it was great to grow up in the home I did and made it, a lot easier than probably someone who never grew up in a home like that. Everyone who's on staff at Timberlake Church gives a minimum of 10%. Just say, I'm gonna be a percentage giver. Now, you might say, I'm gonna start at 2%, I'm gonna start at 4%, whatever it is, every few months, whether you're a priority giver, percentage giver, every few months, every maybe year, just reevaluate. Is this where we're gonna stay? Or is there another step that we can take in our giving? And then finally, I'd say progressive giving, and that's when there's special over and above giving that happens in a church. Sometimes it's a building campaign, other times it's an end of the year Christmas offering, right? Just in 2024, we ended the year by doing what we called an impact offering. We said as we go into 2025, we wanna have a greater impact. And we set a goal, and we had never done this at the end of the year, so there wasn't a number to pick from, but we just picked a number. It's pretty high, and we didn't reach that number, but collectively, we gave more than $600,000 to fuel mission work. Absolutely, it's something absolutely to be proud of. And now we have a baseline. Now we say, okay, that was a number, right? And every Christmas, I'm sure we can take another step forward. But here's what we were able to do. We're able to fund 10 entire freight containers through Convoy of Hope. I don't know that you realize how big of a deal this is, right? Convoy is one of the top-rated nonprofits in the world, faith-based organization. They have these freight containers and semi-trucks full of emergency supplies ready to go when disaster strikes around the world. So when a hurricane breaks through, when there's some sort of disaster, we don't have to stand up here and say, hey, we have a special, we need to receive a special offering. We're gonna say, we've already got 10 entire freights, right, ready to go. Part of that offering is we knew it was time for us to start buying some condos in this area for our residency program. I don't know if you realize this, there's not a whole lot of people in this country, young adults, that say, I want to be in full-time pastoral ministry. This is not happening. And so when someone says, I want to do that, we want to be a place that trains. And guys, we have a great reputation. We get phone calls, emails all the time from people who say, I want to be in your residency program. I want to learn about pastoring and about full-time pastoral ministry in your setting. And so people are coming, we're calling up people, can you host them? Let's put them over here. And so we decided, let's just start buying condos. A couple weeks ago, we were able to buy our first condo because of our offering. And then, as a part of our end of the year offering, we said, what we need to do is we're gonna replace the seats in our auditorium and even add new seats. So we're gonna make everything new, and we're gonna add new seats. And the reason why is we wanna be ready for the future. And I'm gonna tell you this, we still wanna be ready for the future. But I'll just acknowledge this. After the generous outpouring of giving, there's just something in me that didn't sit right. My heart was right in saying, hey, this is what we want to raise funds for, because we had done videos and audio, and this would make the entire auditorium would be like, hey, we're ready to go for the next 25, 30 years. But I just felt like looking at these chairs again, I'm like, it just doesn't seem like the most responsible thing to do. So we're gonna take that amount, and we are gonna do facility improvements. We're just taking some time right now to just document the priority of facility improvements that need to be done. Again, helping us get ready for ministry in the coming years. There's so many ways that I could try to motivate you to give today. I could play a lot of psychological games. I'm just not gonna do it. But as your pastor, I just wanna invite you to take a step toward giving. Confront the fear, confront the shame, confront the guilt, confront the cynicism, whatever it is, just confront it. Say, I'm gonna do it. And I just hope we all get to the place that King David of Israel got to. 3,000 years ago, there was an outpouring of generosity. The Jewish people brought all these things to help support the funding and the building of a temple, and all these resources are there, and he's just praying. He's, God, you're so good. And he says, but who am I? And who are my people that we could give anything to you? Everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you first gave us. Imagine if 100% of us just said, I'm gonna do something. And it's so scary, but I'm gonna become a priority giver. And after I do that, I'm gonna become a percentage giver. And then when opportunities arise, I'm gonna be a progressive giver. Imagine the churches we can start and the pastors we can train, a way that we can help the under-resourced in our world. There's a church down in the Tacoma area that they started in January, and they called us and said, hey, we're new church getting started. Would you help us financially? And we said, it would be our honor. I checked in with the pastor this week. I said, how you guys doing? He said, we're averaging almost 400 people. He said, we're baptizing people. We had almost 700 at Easter. Guys, we get to be a part of that. Here's what I know about people. If they're gonna attend a church, they wanna be part of a generous church. They wanna be a part of a church that gives away coffee and gives away food and doesn't charge for every little thing. And if there's a student who can't go to a youth event that because it costs something, that the church steps in and say, hey, we're gonna help scholarship. They wanna be a part of that. But the only way that happens is when the people of the church say, we're gonna be generous. So, why do churches ask for money? Obviously, there's a very practical aspect. Right? Bills need to be paid. We got to keep heating, air. I get all that. But it's because when we learn to give, it brings joy, and it builds our confidence in God, and it breaks our pride, and it cultivates humility, and it shapes our heart, and it connects us to something bigger than ourselves, and it allows us to be part of what God is doing in this world. So let's be gospel patrons. Let's be people who give. Let's have a year of exponential growth of giving in our church. Well, Dave, how do I do that? How do I give online? You're gonna have to figure it out. I'm not gonna take any time to tell you even how to give, right? We got giving station and different things, but you're gonna have to figure this out. It's gotta be this desire to say, all right, I'm going for it. Be a gospel patron. So how do I do? Well, Dave, you went a little over time. Okay. Guys, I love you. I'm so proud of this church for having the maturity to be generous, because we already have a reputation for generosity, but to also have the maturity to say, how do we continue to get better? How do we continue to stretch ourselves? Would you stand? I'm gonna pray, and then I'm going to dismiss, and there'll be people at the front available to pray with you. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for trusting us with so much. Thank you for the blessings in our life. Give us wisdom to know how to best manage what you've trusted us with. And then give us the courage to just do it. Help us to be gospel patrons. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we are done being the church in here. Let's go be the church out there. We'll see you.